On a bright afternoon in Los Angeles, Barron Trump decided to take a break from his quiet morning of reading and treat himself to lunch at LA Terrace, a high-end restaurant known for its exclusivity, elegance, and refined atmosphere. It was the kind of place where celebrities, CEOs, and influencers often gathered, engaging in hushed conversations over fine cuisine, their presence a symbol of the city's elite culture. Barron had dined there before, appreciating its sophisticated setting and impeccable service, a space where one could enjoy a meal in relative privacy despite the high-profile clientele. However, on this particular visit, something set him apart. His bright red MAGA hat, worn casually atop his head, not as a statement to provoke, but as an expression of his identity, something he carried with ease and without second thought. As he stepped through the glass doors, the hostess greeted him with the same polished demeanor as always, leading him to a corner table where he settled in, unaware of the quiet stir his presence was beginning to create. The restaurant, though not particularly crowded, carried a hushed elegance, with diners engaged in soft conversations, sipping wine and enjoying their meals. Barron opened the menu, scanning for his favorite dish, his posture relaxed, his demeanor calm, oblivious at first to the shifting glances directed his way. A man at the adjacent table nudged his partner, whispering something while two waiters near the bar exchanged quick words, their eyes flicking toward Barron before resuming their tasks. Despite the carefully curated ambiance of neutrality, an undercurrent of tension was beginning to ripple through the space, subtle but undeniable, as some guests struggled to ignore the presence of the young man whose last name alone was enough to elicit reactions. As he waited for service, Barron remained unaware of the quiet storm brewing around him, a moment of calm before the unexpected confrontation that would soon unfold, setting the stage for an incident that would echo far beyond the restaurant walls and spark a citywide conversation about identity, division, and the power of response. As Barron Trump sat quietly at his table scanning the menu, the atmosphere around him began to shift in subtle yet unmistakable ways. The glances from nearby diners became more frequent, whispers lingered a second too long, and the tension in the air, though unspoken, was palpable. Then the moment of confrontation arrived. The restaurant manager, a man in his mid-40s with a sharp suit and a demeanor that suggested both authority and impatience, emerged from the back, his steps brisk, his expression determined. With a voice loud enough to ensure nearby tables could hear, he addressed Barron directly, his tone firm but professional, stating that LA Terrace had a strict policy against political apparel and that the red MAGA hat Barron was wearing violated that rule. The words cut through the low hum of conversation, drawing the attention of diners who, moments ago, had been feigning disinterest but now found themselves invested in the unfolding exchange. Barron looked up, removing his earbuds and setting them on the table, his face calm but slightly puzzled. He had been to this restaurant before, and never once had he encountered such a policy. Maintaining a composed and respectful tone, he simply asked, "I wasn't aware of any policy like that. Could you show me where it's written?" The manager, though momentarily caught off guard by Barron's even-tempered response, gestured vaguely toward the entrance, insisting that the restaurant aimed to maintain a neutral space for all guests and that political statements of any kind were discouraged. Barron tilted his head slightly, considering his options, his mind racing through the implications of the moment. He glanced around the room, noticing how some diners pretended to focus on their meals while others openly watched, their curiosity evident. It was clear that whatever decision he made next would be scrutinized, dissected, and possibly even amplified beyond this dining room. But he had never been one to seek unnecessary conflict, nor was he about to start now. "I'm not here to cause any trouble," he said, his voice steady, his words deliberate. "I just came for lunch." The manager's stance remained rigid, his authority unshaken. "Then I need to ask you to remove the hat," he stated, his voice unwavering, "or I'll have to ask you to leave." A brief silence followed, stretching longer than it should have, the weight of the ultimatum pressing heavily against the delicate facade of civility that had been maintained until now. Barron's expression remained unreadable, his posture composed, but after a pause he made his decision. Without protest or hesitation, he pushed his chair back, stood, and with a simple nod responded, "If that's how you feel, then I'll leave." His voice carried no bitterness, no anger, just a quiet resolve that somehow carried more weight than any argument would have. As he gathered his belongings, the restaurant fell into an uneasy hush, the clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation momentarily forgotten. The door closed softly behind him as he stepped outside, the warmth of the California sun hitting his face, a stark contrast to the cold reception he had just received. Adjusting his hat slightly, he took a deep breath, frustration bubbling beneath the surface, but never quite breaking through. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way people might expect. What he felt more than anything was disappointment. Disappointment that a simple expression of personal belief had led to exclusion, that even in a space meant for leisure, division had found its way in. As he walked away, leaving behind an untouched glass of water and an unresolved debate, the real consequences of the moment had only just begun to unfold. As Barron Trump walked away from LA Terrace, the quiet tension inside the restaurant did not dissipate but instead thickened, lingering in the air like an unspoken question. The diners who had witnessed the exchange found themselves exchanging furtive glances, some murmuring in hushed tones, others pulling out their phones, their fingers moving swiftly across screens as they recounted what they had just seen. It didn't take long for the story to begin spreading beyond the confines of the elegant dining room. A blurry photo of Barron walking out, still wearing his red MAGA hat, surfaced online, accompanied by a simple yet provocative caption. They kicked Barron Trump out of LA Terrace for wearing a hat. Within minutes, the post gained traction, first among the local community, then reaching far beyond as social media users began to weigh in on what had happened. The reactions were swift, divided, and intense. Some users expressed outrage, calling the incident an infringement on personal freedom, a blatant example of political bias, and an unnecessary escalation over something as simple as an article of clothing. So much for inclusivity, one person tweeted, while another added, "Freedom of expression only applies when they agree with you." Others, however, defended the restaurant's stance, arguing that private establishments had the right to set dress codes and that political symbols, regardless of affiliation, could disrupt the neutrality of shared spaces. "It's a restaurant, not a rally," a commenter insisted, while another stated, "They enforce the rules equally. If someone walked in with an offensive slogan, we'd want them out too." The debate quickly turned into a polarized battleground, with media outlets picking up the controversy, each offering their own angle. Some articles framed Barron as a victim of intolerance, a young man unfairly targeted simply because of his last name and what it represented. Others defended the restaurant, painting it as a business merely trying to maintain a politically neutral environment for its guests. Meanwhile, LA Terrace found itself at the center of an escalating firestorm. The restaurant's social media pages, once filled with aesthetic food photography and glowing customer reviews, became inundated with comments, some in support, but many critical, questioning their commitment to fairness and open discourse. "Banning someone over a hat isn't neutrality, it's choosing a side," one particularly liked comment read. Regular customers began canceling reservations, some calling for boycotts, while others doubled down in their support of the establishment's decision. In the midst of it all, Barron remained notably silent. Unlike others who might have taken to social media to defend themselves, denounce the restaurant, or fuel the debate, he chose not to engage in the online frenzy. Instead, as he sat on a quiet bench in a nearby park, scrolling through the flood of messages and opinions, he found himself contemplating not just the incident itself, but the larger implications of what had happened. He wasn't looking for sympathy, nor was he interested in retaliating. What mattered to him was not the noise surrounding the controversy, but the opportunity hidden within it. An opportunity to shift the focus from division to something greater, something meaningful, something that could turn a negative experience into a moment of constructive change. As Barron sat on the bench, the noise of the online debate swirling around him, he knew that feeding into the outrage would accomplish nothing. He could have easily responded with a statement, called out the restaurant for what had happened, or let the moment spiral further into controversy, but none of those options aligned with the way he had been raised or the values he wanted to uphold. Instead of seeing the incident as an attack, he saw it as an opportunity to do something constructive, to shift the conversation away from division and toward unity. Pulling out his phone, he started making calls, reaching out to a few close friends, mentors, and community leaders for advice. His idea was simple yet powerful. If LA Terraz wanted to avoid political messages, why not create an event that encouraged open dialogue instead? Rather than retaliate, he would organize a community fundraiser that would bring people together, a gathering focused on bridging divides rather than deepening them. He envisioned an event that would raise funds for underprivileged communities while simultaneously promoting conversations about free speech, understanding, and the importance of respectful discourse. The more he thought about it, the more the plan took shape in his mind. The best place to hold the event, he decided, was right outside LA Terrace. Not as an act of defiance, but as a symbolic gesture that even spaces of conflict could be transformed into places of unity. He reached out to local organizations that specialized in community engagement, youth mentorship, and open dialogue initiatives, explaining his vision and inviting them to take part. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Within hours, the groundwork was being laid. A close friend volunteered to handle logistics, another contact in the music industry offered to set up live performances, and a well-known community leader agreed to help spread the word. Barron worked late into the night drafting a proposal for the event, carefully outlining its purpose and objectives. He didn't want it to be seen as a political statement or a protest, but rather as an opportunity to remind people that conversations, real, meaningful conversations, could still happen even when disagreements existed. He wanted to emphasize that respect should not be conditional, that differences in belief should not automatically create enemies, and that in a time when people were so quick to take sides, there was still room for common ground. By the next morning, the plan was already in motion. The event was scheduled for the following day, and volunteers began setting up tables, booths, and a small stage where discussions and speeches would take place. Large banners were printed with the words "United We Stand, Building Bridges, Not Walls," reinforcing the central message of the event. Food trucks and donation stations were arranged, and community members from all walks of life began showing interest. The fundraiser wasn't just about raising money. It was about creating an atmosphere where people could gather, listen, and understand one another, proving that moments of division could be transformed into opportunities for unity. As the preparations continued, Barron remained focused, knowing that the real test would come not from the backlash he had received, but from how he chose to rise above it. The morning of the fundraiser arrived, and the quiet street in front of LA Terrace had transformed into a vibrant hub of energy and unity. Trucks unloaded equipment, volunteers set up tables, and banners bearing the bold message, "United We Stand, Building Bridges, Not Walls," fluttered in the gentle Los Angeles breeze. The event was more than just a fundraiser. It was a statement that differences did not have to lead to division, that people could come together despite contrasting beliefs, and that dialogue was always an option, even in moments of conflict. Barron stood at the center of it all, overseeing the final preparations with a quiet confidence, ensuring that every detail was in place. Food trucks lined the sidewalks, offering meals to attendees, while booths representing local charities, mentorship programs, and community building initiatives welcomed guests with open arms. A small stage had been set up where musicians performed uplifting melodies, setting a tone of warmth and togetherness rather than protest or defiance. As the first wave of attendees arrived, it was clear that the event had already exceeded expectation. Families, young professionals, activists, and even a few familiar faces from social media showed up, drawn not just by curiosity but by the powerful message behind the gathering. Some had heard about the incident at LA Terrace, others had simply come to support a cause that resonated with them. What had started as a moment of conflict had now turned into something much greater, a movement rooted in respect and understanding. As the crowd grew, Barron took to the stage, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he addressed the audience. "Yesterday I was asked to leave a restaurant because of a hat. That's okay, I respect their policies, even if I don't agree with them. But what struck me wasn't just being turned away, it was the bigger picture. We've become so quick to judge each other, to take sides, to shut down conversations before they even begin. That's not who we are. We can do better." The crowd erupted in applause, their support echoing down the street as Barron continued. "This event isn't about me, and it's not about them. It's about all of us, finding ways to listen, to understand, to come together. The funds we raise today will go toward programs that foster dialogue and inclusion because that's what we need more of. As he stepped off the stage, the applause was louder this time, not just for his words, but for the message they carried. People engaged in meaningful discussions, donations poured in, and the atmosphere felt alive with a sense of purpose. What had begun as an exclusionary act had now become an opportunity for connection, proving that the most powerful response to division was not outrage, but unity. Inside LA Terraza, the atmosphere was starkly different from the vibrant energy outside. What was once a bustling, sought-after restaurant now felt eerily quiet. The usual hum of conversation replaced by an underlying tension that none of the staff could ignore. The manager, who had confidently stood by his decision the previous day, now found himself glued to his phone, scrolling through the avalanche of comments flooding the restaurant's social media pages. He had expected some backlash, but the sheer magnitude of it caught him off guard. Patrons canceling reservations, negative reviews piling up, and former loyal customers expressing disappointment in what they saw as an unnecessary act of exclusion. He tried to brush it off, convincing himself that it would all blow over in a few days, but deep down, doubt had begun to creep in. He glanced out the window, watching as the fundraiser continued to grow, the street once dominated by quiet luxury now brimming with a diverse crowd, united not by politics, but by a shared belief in something greater, understanding, dialogue, and community. Some of his own staff had stepped outside, drawn by the music, the conversations, and the undeniable warmth of the gathering. A waiter returned, hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. "You should go out there. Talk to him." The manager stiffened, gripping the edge of the counter. "This isn't my fight," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. But the words felt hollow, lacking the conviction they had carried the day before. The waiter shrugged, glancing at the event outside. "Maybe not, but it's definitely your chance." The manager didn't respond, but something about that statement stuck with him. He turned his gaze back to the fundraiser, watching as Barron moved through the crowd, shaking hands, listening, engaging, not retaliating, not fueling division, but building something positive out of what could have remained a bitter controversy. With a quiet sigh, the manager set down his phone, straightened his tie, and after a moment of hesitation, stepped toward the door, knowing that whatever happened next could change more than just the way people saw him. It could change the way he saw himself. As the fundraiser continued in full swing, the buzz of conversation, music, and laughter filled the air, but a quiet shift occurred when the doors of Terrace finally opened and the restaurant manager stepped outside. The crowd instinctively turned, their eyes following his cautious steps as he made his way toward Barron Trump, his usual air of authority tempered by something else. Uncertainty, perhaps even humility. Barron, who had been speaking with a small group of attendees, noticed the manager's approach and paused, offering a polite but unreadable expression. There was no tension in his posture, no trace of bitterness, just the same quiet confidence that had defined his response from the beginning. The manager hesitated for the briefest of moments before extending his hand. "I'd like to talk," he said, his voice low, almost drowned out by the surrounding noise. Barron studied him for a moment before nodding, shaking his hand firmly but without triumph, and gesturing toward a quieter spot near the edge of the event. As they walked, the onlookers, though respectful, couldn't help but observe, knowing that this moment carried weight far beyond the two individuals involved. The manager exhaled slowly, glancing at the fundraiser before turning his gaze to Barron. "I need to start by saying I didn't handle yesterday well," he admitted, his voice steadier now. "I thought I was doing what was best for my restaurant, for my staff, but I realize now that I made a mistake. I judged you before I even spoke to you, and I let my own fears dictate my actions." Barron listened intently, his expression thoughtful but not harsh. He had not come here for an apology, but he understood its significance. "It takes courage to admit that," he finally said. "Thank you for saying it." The manager nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face, but there was still more to be said. "Watching what you did today, it's humbling," he continued, motioning toward the event. "You could have retaliated, turned this into a fight, but instead you created something positive. That's not something most people would do. Barron offered a faint smile. I don't think the world needs more anger or division, he replied simply. What happened yesterday could have just added to the noise, but I wanted to show that there's a better way. The manager was silent for a moment before straightening his stance. I want to support what you're doing here, he said. If there's a way for me or the restaurant to contribute, I'd be happy to. Barron considered this, then nodded. I think the best way to contribute is to reflect on how we treat each other. Policies are important, but they shouldn't come at the cost of kindness and understanding. Maybe LA Terrace could host an event like this, one that brings people together instead of pushing them apart. The manager blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. But as he thought about it, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. I think that's a great idea, he said. Let's make it happen. They shook hands again, this time with genuine warmth, and as the crowd sensed the resolution, applause rippled through the event. Not for a victory, not for a defeat, but for the simple, profound power of understanding. In the aftermath of the event, as the sun dipped lower and the last of the attendees began to disperse, the true impact of what had transpired started to take shape. Not just for Barron Trump or the restaurant manager, but for everyone who had witnessed how a moment of division had been transformed into an opportunity for connection. The lesson was clear. Conflict does not have to lead to resentment, and disagreement does not have to mean the end of dialogue. In a world where people are so often quick to react, to take sides, and to let differences define them, Barron had chosen a different path, one that prioritized understanding over outrage, conversation over condemnation. His decision to channel an exclusionary experience into a community-building event sent a powerful message that true leadership is not about proving a point, but about fostering solutions. He could have easily taken to social media to call out the restaurant, fueling the controversy and deepening the divide, but instead, he chose to rise above the moment, proving that the most effective response to division is to create unity. The response from the manager also carried an important lesson, one of humility, growth, and the ability to acknowledge a mistake. It is easy to stand by one's decisions, to dig in out of pride or fear of public backlash, but it takes real strength to step forward, admit an error, and seek to make things right. His willingness to listen, to reassess, and ultimately to embrace a more inclusive approach demonstrated that even those who make missteps can be part of a solution if they are open to change. More broadly, the event reminded people that respect should not be conditional, that the right to express oneself should not come at the expense of another's dignity, and that neutrality should mean creating spaces where people can coexist, not selectively deciding who belongs. It also highlighted the power of choice, how every individual, when faced with adversity, has the ability to decide whether they will add to the conflict or work toward resolution. In choosing the latter, Barron proved that real influence comes not from reacting in anger, but from responding with purpose. His actions demonstrated that the loudest voice in the room is not always the most impactful one. Sometimes the strongest statement is made through quiet confidence, thoughtful action, and an unwavering commitment to bridging divides rather than deepening them. As people left the event, many carried with them more than just the memory of what had happened. They carried a renewed sense of hope that, even in a world often divided by politics, beliefs, and ideologies, unity is still possible when people choose to see each other not as opponents, but as individuals with stories worth understanding. As we navigate an increasingly divided world, where opinions often spark conflict rather than conversation, the story of Barron Trump and the restaurant incident serves as a valuable reminder that grace, humility, and thoughtful action are far more powerful than anger or retaliation. For older generations who have witnessed decades of social change, this lesson holds particular significance. Over time, we learned that wisdom is not in how loudly we argue, but in how well we listen and respond with dignity. Barron's choice to turn a moment of exclusion into an opportunity for unity demonstrates that true strength lies in remaining composed in the face of adversity. In life, we are all bound to face moments of unfair treatment, moments where we feel judged for who we are or what we believe. The natural instinct might be to fight back, to demand retribution, But growth and resolution come from responding with poise and purpose. Rather than fueling outrage, Barron focused on building bridges, a lesson that applies to all aspects of life, whether in family relationships, workplaces, or communities. Moreover, the restaurant manager's willingness to acknowledge his mistake highlights another profound truth. It is never too late to change, to reflect, and to make amends. Many people hold firm to their decisions out of pride, but real character is shown when we can admit when we are wrong and choose a better path forward. Life is filled with such moments, times when we must decide whether to stand by our ego or open ourselves to growth. The ability to listen, to reconsider, and to choose reconciliation over division is a strength, not a weakness. This story also serves as a powerful reminder that respect should be a default, not a privilege that must be earned. In a time where people are quick to judge based on appearances, affiliations, or differences, we must ask ourselves, are we creating space for dialogue, or are we shutting doors on each other? The lesson is clear. When we choose understanding over judgment, unity over division, and dignity over hostility, we create a world where people can coexist with respect and compassion, regardless of their differences.